All right, we are now joined on the Soccer Hour on A10 KSFO, brought to you by your NorCal Honda dealers. It is Heath Pierce, MLS Season Pass on Apple TV. Heath, what's going on, man? How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I apologize. I'm talking to you from my phone right now instead of my usual kind of setup where I feel a little bit more professional. But I'm ironing out some of this off-season stuff. I'm in preseason, I guess you could say, just like the players are.
You've got 10 days to get fit. That's the question. Let me just ask you about your career. What were you fit usually going into training camp, or do you need training camp to kind of acclimate yourself? Because I've heard both ends. Guys say they show up and they're not 100%, then that's asking for an injury. Other guys say that if they don't kind of get into shape during camp, they feel themselves kind of break down earlier in the season.
Yeah, I mean, I tended to come in pretty fit. Obviously, you can't really simulate game environments. You can't simulate high intensity training environments. I always tried to spend my off seasons in areas where I could get some small group training, things like that, to keep your touch sharp, keep your sort of lung capacity as premium or high level as possible. But it is tough to simulate. So I was always excited to get back into training camps and get into, I always thank the double days when the double days were over, but never enjoyed them while they were happening.
One of the things that I've heard from a lot of good teams, be it in MLS or other sports, is they talk about when they had, championships or very high level runs, that practice or training was highly competitive. Things got physical. Guys were pushing and shoving and getting in each other's faces. But as soon as that ended, then it was seen as a benefit for the team. Did you experience things like that where the highly competitive practices led to the team being that much better overall?
Yeah, I think it's a mix, right? I think the highly competitive practices, the intensity, you see those a lot after a loss. You see those a lot after like tough times when the intensity goes up. Everybody's a little bit aggravated. You see it in a preseason when you're fighting for jobs, and then throughout the season, I think for a coaching staff, that's the challenge: is how do you find that right level of intensity that's beneficial to the team without being a detriment in terms of isolating players and creating clicks and things like that. And so I always saw the positive response that came after that. And then when the intensity goes up, generally the quality can go up as well. And that's when you start to see some of the fun come together, good combination play, little things, that patterns of play that come out where you start to go, especially when if you're Bruce Arena, for example, you're bringing in a new group. Yes, you've brought in some players that have worked for you in the past, but you start to go like, okay, these guys like each other. Oh, these guys have a good vibe. And you go, okay, that was a team building moment in terms of combination play, a good goal, a good cross, good finish where everybody sort of lights up. Those little things are little key indicators of like being on the right track.
That's one of the things people always talk about with Bruce Arena, is that he has the good vibes going and guys getting along. I mean, to your point about having fun, whether it be, in a game or, at practice, eventually everybody's got to be having fun collective as a unit. I mean, it is a game, it is a sport. It's supposed to be fun, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I played my first, I think, six caps with the national team under Bruce Arena. And I remember coming in as a young player before the 2006 World Cup and being very sort of out of my element, very nervous. I was now around all these guys that I had looked up to just 1 year ago, being like, I hope I get to meet these guys someday, not let alone get on the field with them. And Bruce created a real environment of and cultivated that inclusivity. He liked to poke and prod at players and tease and create sort of those inside joke type of things that are within the team that you can build on throughout a year or throughout a season. And that's things that you can go back to that help to build that human connection that I think he's so good at. I wouldn't say that he was the most focused on young players or player development or all those types of things, but he was good at as extracting talent from players regardless of the team, and then ultimately extracting the value out of the squad in general.
People don't talk a lot about his tactical acumen, though. That's something I always have noticed, is even though he's the most decorated coach in American football history, it seems like everybody talks about how fun he makes it as opposed to clearly doing something right on the pitch. I mean, you referenced, bringing the most, cultivating the best ability out of those individual players, but I mean, he's organizing his teams. We've got, over 30 years to look at here. He's clearly doing something right.
Well, when I just look at the players that he signed in this offseason, you look at the squad players that he's brought in from the New England Revolution. You look at the experienced players like a Joseph Martinez, a Chicho Arango. I think there's a little bit of a two-way street with the type of player that he's brought in, right? The expectations are you're a proven player. You have the right mentality. You've survived this long because of that mentality. There are expectations I'm setting upon you to be able to follow. Bruce still builds the parameters of a position and the expectations, like pressing lines, lines of confrontation, what you want from your wingers, your midfielders, your defenders. But I would say there's a broader ability to express yourself within those parameters than I think maybe some other coaches who are a little bit more, pieces on a chessboard in terms of how you move and whatnot. There's a little bit more freedom of expression, at least that I remember playing under Bruce. That was, hey, these are still the basics. These are still the expectations of this position. This is still how we're going to go about winning collectively as a group. But within your position, there was that freedom of exploration, that freedom of expression that I really liked when I had the chance to play for him.
How much of the war to be won for Bruce is changing the culture, especially coming off a year like the Earthquakes had last year, in which they tied the record for most losses in a season and set a new record for most goals conceded?
Well, when I think about the New England Revolution, I think that they were in a pretty poor place when Bruce came in, and he turned them around and had a record-setting season. You saw not only that, but Noel Buck getting time as a young player, Bozak Terovich getting time as a player. So he's not afraid to play young players and work them into a lineup. He's not afraid to work with egos. He's not afraid to give Carlos Hill the freedom to roam. And so when I think about where the Revs were at that time and where they got to, and I think about San Jose and the pieces that they have, I think the first step was making some changes with the lineup in the offseason. Some players that I think maybe fan favorites, maybe on paper really good, but you make those changes and now you have an opportunity for a fresh start to tap into what I think is the Earthquakes culture going back, 20, 30, 40 years on what it means to represent San Jose. And so I think he's brought in some players that have the acumen to do that. But the test is going to be, can you get all of those pieces together, right? You look at the friendly, and it's just a preseason match today, but you start with 4 of your big name players on the field. Your team doesn't go about getting a result. How do you respond from that? It's easy to say, hey, it's just a preseason game. We're building on this. Yes, we changed our team significantly at halftime. You've got 2 big center back signings. You've got 4 others that played last year. You have now an opportunity to start to tinker and find the mold and then ultimately manage those egos because you've got a lot of big names in this squad now. And so it's going to be a challenge, but that's why you bring in a Bruce Arena, because I think he's up for that challenge. He's up for that task. He's not afraid to have hard conversations. He's not afraid to go, okay, yeah, we're all having fun in games. I like to create a positive environment, but let's take a step back, time out. This is not good enough. And so it'll be a unique start to the season, but a great opportunity when you look at the player personnel, the experience that's now within this squad, and then now how you take a Luchi Gonzalez and others within the club to help to sort of like give it the jet fuel to say, this is what it's like historically to play for the club. You've now got a number of young players coming into the team with getting more minutes similar to last year, with whether that's Jakiris or Verhoeven like they did last year. You've also got Spivey with the opportunity to get some minutes this year. So it's a lot of really unique pieces when you think about it holistically. Mm-hmm. But San Jose fans want to win now, right? And they deserve to have a club that emphasizes this season. And so that's going to be the test. How quickly can you get everybody on the same page, rowing in the same direction, to get the results and do it in a way that I think is satisfactory for the DNA of the club?
Hernan came in last year at the season was not lost technically, but they were 1-8-1 when he played his first game. They were in quite a hole. They then, had a tough run to the finish, but now Hernan starts the year off with San Jose. And if I'm Christian Espinosa, who has been one of the most consistent performers in Major League Soccer since the minute he arrived, he's probably thinking, okay, now I've got Hernan in the pocket. I've got either Joseph Martinez or Chicho Arango up top. We're still seeing what they're going to do with the left wing situation, but Christian Espinosa's got to be A, licking his chops, and B, thinking he can have something like a career season, right?
Well, absolutely. When I think about a Christian Espinosa, the thing that I've always complained about with his game is the thing that I think is going to benefit his game even more this year is the fact that, like, how much work he's willing to do for the team, right? And when you think about a DP or a big name within a club, uh, you think about somebody who's maybe as big as the club, right? If not bigger, a lot of times in the history of the league. But he's always been a blue collar DP in terms of the work that he's willing to do. If you stop the game at any time, he's at the top of the area on the defensive end, willing to do the work and track a player back. And I've always complained that, like, this is not where you want him. Get him further up the field. But now when you look at the pieces and the tools of saying, okay, the risk to reward of having a player like that with that mentality, when you look across the board, a full season with Hernan, as you mentioned, and like you said up top, whether that's Chicho or Martinez being able to provide, he's got to be pretty excited. One, at the ability of, like, I know I can put the ball in dangerous spots. Now I've got proven strikers and proven at the highest level in Major League Soccer year over year that can put the ball away. So if we get one chance, we got one goal. If we get multiple chances, we've got multiple goals. And if you think about what San Jose needed last year, is like, it went from, we like to score more than the other team, to we just got to grind one out and get that 1-0, that hard fought win. But you can see where things are going to come from on the offensive end. You've just now got to look up the spine and say, okay, what's the DNA of our midfield? No Gruezo anymore. I think it's an opportunity to move on from that. He had a lot of tools to offer the team on certain aspects of the game, but I think you can have a more complementary midfield now. And then your back line. How can we have that mentality of, like, when you look in front of you, right? If you're a center back on the team, you go, okay, we're going to get our goals this year. That's for sure. And you have to tap into that mindset. And myself as a former defender, to say, we're going to fight like hell for these guys. We are going to grind out everything. We will do all the work. You stay up there, you do your thing, and we'll cover for you. And when you start to see that, and when you see a player like Espinoza track back and make a big tackle, those are the little tiny things within a team where you're like, okay, we're building on this. Nobody's too big for this. We know where the goals are going to come from. And now it's our job to see those things out. Not to say they didn't have that last year and they just weren't able to. But I think when you look at just the quality and the proven nature of the players that they have in the attack, and for San Jose this year, you go, if that gets firing and we can figure out how to clean things up on the defensive end, it could be a really exciting season.
Were you ever able to figure out what was wrong with San Jose's defense last year from the perspective of a defender? Because far too often I saw the Quakes trying to be Manchester City of a half decade ago, play the one pass, think it would be a through ball that would lead, and then instead it would turn over, they'd flip the field, they'd be on their heels, get caught out in transition, and they'd concede goals. And I don't know if that's an oversimplification, but it was kind of like, well, guys, that's happening over and over and over. It needs to stop. And yet that consistent scenario was presenting over and over and over. But it shouldn't have been that bad, right?
Yeah. Well, I think the hard part with last year is there were a lot of outlier type of moments, right? When I think about, say, Colorado from a couple years before, where it's like one chance, one goal against, type of thing. That seemed to happen where you go, okay, we've shored up the left side, right? Now everything else that's been good is good. And then all of a sudden you get beat on the right side for San Jose last year. Like, we stopped giving away the bad ball and now it's a set piece. It's like those things where you're constantly chasing. And I think that just wore on the team, and the pressure gets bigger and the distance gets further from a playoff spot, and the points seem to be out of reach. That I don't think there was any one particular thing. I just think it was a bad year with bad luck led to this catastrophic sort of outcome in terms of results over the year. And so often they were so close and just couldn't either see out the win or see out the draw. And then you go, okay, so we can't close in final moments. We're having trouble in the run of play. And you go, well, but then when you look on paper, when some of those windows, as somebody who sees all the games, you go 15, 20 minutes, it's brilliant. You go, well, where is that? Okay, we got to extend that out to a half. Okay, you get that occasionally. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, now we've actually had a decent performance. 90th minute, you give up a goal, right? And that went back 2 seasons ago of, like, sort of the late inability to close out games. And so those are the little things where you're like, okay, we're not confident closing games. We're not confident in these types of moments just before the half. Set pieces, these little things, and then it just goes, all of a sudden each player is a little bit hesitant. And again, I'm just making up stuff right now of things that I saw that went wrong, having covered, 10 plus games of the team last year. Yeah. But you would hope this year you now have an opportunity from the start to clean that up and go to very simple foundation. I do think it's not that Bruce Arena doesn't do tactics or isn't a tactician. I think sometimes in the modern game, we get caught up in like just the beauty of tactics, as if everything is, they talk about, there's stats out there now of like, hey, if the team moves 5 feet further or 5 yards further up the field, there's like a 17% decrease in opportunities to score goals over 90 minutes. And that leads to, minus 20 goals against over. Like there's all these things that you can dive super deep into. Right. But there's also a simplicity of just like hard-nosed defending, of like pressure cover balance, of all the fundamentals you learn as a kid of like, you step out, I come in, all the little things of like, assume your partner is going to get beat. I'm going to go and make that play. Those types of team building things that are hard to do when you're in sort of that hurricane of bad results. You now have a preseason where maybe the results matter, maybe they don't, but you've got time to build that together and build a foundation, because the quality is there on the defensive end. But there's nothing about the statistics that would point to that last season.
What do you make of Salt Lake? Because last year they had a really, really nice first half. Chicho Arango gets suspended. He's not the same for the rest of the season. The team never quite finds the same form. What are they heading into this season?
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Might have lost you there for a second, but I heard you. I think the big question for them is going to be where are the goals coming from, right? I think defensively they were solid last year, and I think they've proven on their back line that they've got depth, and they continue to add depth. Maybe not the big name depth big name that you would expect over the years, but I think over 2 seasons they've proven that like this is a great combination with Vera and Glad at the center backs, right? Catranis as a fullback. You have a lot of good players that I think have proven to fit within the system, proven to fit within Pablo Mastroeni's mentality, driven system, and so I think they're good there. Emeka Anelli's been a standout player. So you go into the midfield and you've got a number of players, including Anelli, Ojeda, and others that are just like a solid foundation. You've got Lachlan Brook on one wing. You've got Marchuk on the other that they brought in last year. So they did a lot of building last year, I think, for the future. But what wasn't replaced was Chicho Arango, right? What hasn't been replaced is Gomez when he was sold. And Gomez Arango was one of the best combinations in the league. I think Gomez was in a window of time, to be fair, where he went from a player that was creating chances but didn't have that final ball to like lights out, unbelievable, down to the touchline and perfect ball. They capitalized on that, sold him on. But I think the replacement of that with Lachlan Brook or Marchuk isn't the same type of player. So they've got to figure out now offensively, where are those goals going to come from? And then when you lose an Arango to suspension, or he's not scoring his goals, and you go into your substitution, you had Anderson Julio. Anderson Julio was one of the best off the bench, I think, in the league in terms of providing spark, in terms of creating chances. And so you haven't replaced that as well. They've got quality, but I do think that I would presume they're still in the market looking at what their team come summer is going to be in terms of their ability to not only control games with possession, be good and sound defensively, which I think they still are, but where are they going to consistently be a goal-scoring threat?
How hard is it for each side to figure out what they want to do tactically in game one, knowing that both these teams, no one has quite seen them before? I mean, it's the same for every team in the league. I mean, even preseason film won't tell you everything.
Yeah, it's tough. And I think, interestingly, I would guess maybe less so for Pablo Mastroeni, because I think for him, you've got Diogo Gonçalves, you've got some attacking options, but not necessarily proven in like, we know where our goals are going to come from, right? In the way that we have in the past, where they were scoring, multiple goals a game consistently. I think if you're Bruce, you're probably tinkering a little bit into the start of the season, right? Of like, what's the right combination? We saw last year of like under Lucci with like, what happens with Espinoza and Hernan? They kind of move into the same spaces at time. How do you create those spaces and those dynamics on the field? Do you start Gruezo as the 6, or do you go with a Yule and a Chiqueras that has a little bit more advancement capabilities? And, those types of things. I think Bruce is going to have to do that at the beginning of the season. He's got reliability in Mark Anthony Kaye, and some of the guys, Dave Romney, guys that he knows inside and out that he can trust.
Mhm.
But I would say more so for San Jose, it's a little bit of like a tinkering and testing of like who gets us into the season, right? Who can get us the early results? And then ultimately, what's our best team, right? What's our best first half team? What's our best second half team? Who do we have as that spark off the bench? Who are the guys that can really light that fire in the locker room? Who are our natural leaders? You're kind of going through that now where I think RSL, which is maybe even more dangerous, have all the pieces to go out and grind those results and play into Pablo Mastroeni's system. But where the frustration will come early in the season is like, hey, we're doing all of this stuff on the defensive end. Where are the goals coming from if they're not getting them? And I think that can be more challenging than, giving yourself the grace of 2, 3, 4 weeks of like, hey, we're working through this. We know something's here and we're going to try to find what those best pieces are.
Heath, I know you got stuff to do, so I will let you go, but I appreciate your time as always, and I look forward to seeing you for week number 1.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.